Under an old overpass, where cracked concrete dripped with rain from days past, a girl and her mother had set up a shelter using tarps, crates, and old cloth. The city passed above them every day, but no one ever stopped to look. The space was tight, damp, and dark. The torn mattress was shared between them, and the makeshift stove made of bricks didn't always work. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent to the small life hidden in the city's shadows. At the local public school, she walked through the hallways like a shadow. Her borrowed uniform, too big for her small frame, was stained and frayed at the edges. Her lowered gaze avoided eye contact, as if every step needed to apologize for existing. In class, teachers rarely noticed her presence. Classmates ignored her or mocked her quietly. She always sat in the back, near a peeling wall, drawing invisible lines with her finger on a scratched desk, trying to disappear into the silence. During recess, while the others crowded around snacks and soda, she would retreat to a corner of the wall where the sun barely reached. Carefully, she'd unwrap a dry piece of bread from a reused napkin and eat slowly, as if chewing too fast would make it vanish too soon. Eyes watched, but didn't meet hers. She listened to the conversations, the laughter, the games, but never took part. It was as if a glass separated her from the rest of the world. A glass that didn't reflect, only divided. At the end of the day, she walked back to the shelter with slow steps, crossing busy streets like someone walking between two worlds, the visible and the forgotten. Her mother waited with a tired smile and the leftovers of something they managed to heat. Even with Lil, there was routine. She washed her feet with a bucket of cold water, carefully organized their few belongings, and went to bed early. And there, under that improvised roof, she closed her eyes without knowing if tomorrow would bring anything different. Yet still, she hoped without knowing why. At the entrance of the school, a colorful poster announced the Talent Week. The students crowded around to put their names on the performance list. Dances, imitations, magic tricks. It was an awaited event, more for fun than for actual talent. In the middle of the commotion, a group of classmates exchanged knowing glances and stifled laughter. With a red pen, they wrote the girl's name in the space designated for musical performances. It was a planned joke, a cruel act disguised as fun. No adult noticed, and no one stopped them. Later, when the hallways were empty, she passed by the list by chance. When she saw her name written there, she froze. She didn't understand the reason or who had done it, but the mockery hidden between the lines was clear. Her presence on the paper was a deliberate mistake and a silent warning. In the following days, whispers increased around her. Some students pointed and laughed, others just shook their heads as if they already knew the disaster to come. She didn't react. She just walked more slowly, more hunched, as if that could prevent what was coming. At home, under the bridge, she didn't tell her mother anything. She kept doing the usual chores, fetching water, organizing their few items, going to bed early. But that night, her eyes took longer to close. The concrete above felt heavier, and the noise of cars seemed closer than ever. Lying on the thin mattress, she stared at the shapeless ceiling. She felt a weight in her chest she couldn't name, a mix of fear, shame, and helplessness. Out there, the city slept, but inside her, something began to move, though still without direction. The school set up a small stage in the courtyard with borrowed microphones and speakers connected by worn-out cables. The event was near. Students talked excitedly about each expected performance, but saved silent laughs for the final act. She listened to everything from afar. She didn't know if she could back out, if she would be forced to go up there, or if anyone would notice the absurdity. But the truth was, no one seemed to care. Her name was on the list, and that was enough for everyone to expect her humiliation. The day was approaching, and with it, the inevitable. On the morning of the event, the school was more agitated than usual. Colorful balloons decorated the gates, and speakers played cheerful music between one performance and another. The students wore special outfits, and parents began to arrive, filling the courtyard with anxious looks. She arrived early wearing the only clean clothes she had, a light blouse, already yellowed with time, and a pair of pants mended many times. She walked silently to the entrance, not knowing where to go, not receiving any nods or smiles. She was just one more presence that no one wanted to notice. In the improvised backstage area, classmates laughed and traded stickers, some rehearsing choreography with enthusiasm. She remained seated in a corner, hands on her lap, eyes fixed on the ground. No one included her in the conversations. A muffled laugh would rise every time they looked in her direction. Time passed slowly. With each name called to the stage, the applause rose, phones recorded, cheers echoed. But for her, it all felt distant, as if it were happening in another place, another dimension. The sound seemed muffled, and the minutes stretched like a punishment. Finally, the microphone screeched, and her name was announced. The presenter's tone carried a subtle hesitation, almost imperceptible, as if he himself expected something embarrassing. Some people laughed before even seeing her go on stage. She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the collective gaze. Each step to the stage felt harder than the last. When she reached the center, she could see nothing beyond the lights. The sound of the audience disappeared. There was only a strange emptiness, dense, as if the world held its breath. For a few seconds, no one moved. She stood there frozen, not knowing whether to run, cry, or just wait for it all to end quickly. But then, something inside her rose, not an impulse, but a memory, the feeling of lying on the thin mattress, hearing the world move on without her. In an almost automatic gesture, she closed her eyes. The environment around her lost shape. There was only her, the silence, and the emptiness filled by a force that came from nowhere outside. The audience, once restless, began to quiet down, not out of respect, but because of an inexplicable discomfort, as if something was about to happen. When her voice began to fill the space, she herself didn't notice. It was a simple sound, effortless, that seemed to have been kept hidden for too long. There was no background music, no microphone, only the pure sound escaping from someone who had never been allowed to be heard. At first, a few whispers persisted, but they were quickly silenced by something invisible. The conversation stopped, eyes turned toward her, and even the most persistent laughter dissolved. The entire courtyard plunged into a rarefied silence, as if the air had grown denser with every word she sang. Among the adults present, a woman looked up from her notebook. She wore a white blouse and a badge hanging around her neck. She wasn't a school employee, but a visitor. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in judgment, but in silent surprise. She didn't write anything down. She just watched. Her gaze followed the girl attentively, not because of her clothes or her background, but because of the raw emotion in her voice. There was an unguarded intensity there, a sincerity that no technique could teach. And the woman, with years of experience, recognized it immediately. When the performance ended, there was no euphoria. For a few seconds, no one moved. It was as if time had paused, unsure how to react to what had just happened. And then, slowly, a single clap echoed, not as applause, but as a gesture of respect. Other claps followed, reserved, almost timid. There were no cheers or exaggeration, only a quiet emotion that spread like water on dry ground. The girl remained motionless, not understanding what it meant. But something in her posture showed that, for the first time, she had been heard. After the event, while students dispersed and teachers wrapped things up, the woman with the badge approached slowly. The girl was still sitting alone, hands clasped on her knees, trying to make sense of what had happened. The approach was calm, without fuss. The woman brought no promises, only a simple card and a steady look. She said a few words, enough to open a new possibility. An audition in another place, with other people, where her presence would not be a joke. It was the beginning of something she didn't yet have a name for, but that was already moving with a force of its own. The building was tall, modern, with wide hallways and walls covered in paintings and certificates. She arrived by bus, holding an old backpack and an envelope with the documents from the invitation. Her shoes were clean, but worn. Her clothes were simple, but carefully arranged. The other candidates were already waiting, many accompanied by their parents. They wore well-pressed clothes, fancy headphones, confident postures. She looked around and felt her body shrink. She was there because someone believed in her, but at that moment, she no longer knew if it had been a mistake. In the first workshops, the technical terms sounded like another language. The instructors talked about diaphragmatic breathing, vocal range, harmonic expression. Her classmates discussed sheet music, tonalities, and repertoires. She just listened in silence, writing down words she didn't understand. In the hallways, the comments weren't cruel, but they weren't welcoming either. A sideways glance, a discreet whisper, a muffled laugh. No one confronted her, but no one included her. The doubt grew like a shadow. Maybe that invitation had been a mistake. At night, in the dormitory, she sat alone by the window, watching the city lights in the distance. She missed the sound of cars over the bridge, the smell of smoke and soap. The new silence felt colder than the old one. The mattress was better, but the dreams felt farther away. She would open her old loose-leaf notebook for no reason. as if just touching the paper was enough to remember who she was. But even there, within those clean and comfortable walls, she began to think that maybe she didn't have a right to be in that space. The feeling of not belonging tightened, like a knot. One night, while everyone was getting ready for bed, she remembered lying under the bridge, hearing the world ignore her. There, even with nothing, she felt more whole than here. In this place full of promises. Because under the bridge, at least, no one pretended to see her. But then, in an almost instinctive gesture, she whispered a forgotten melody between her teeth. One she heard when she was little, that her mother used to sing to keep the cold away. The sound was weak, timid, but familiar. And in that moment, she understood. Maybe she didn't belong to that place, but the voice inside her did. The school's administration announced the final performance of the cycle, open to the public and with the presence of musicians, teachers, and special guests. Each student would choose a song to perform. The atmosphere was one of anticipation and quiet competition. Her classmates prepared with instruments, costumes, and choreography. She received the news with a tight feeling in her chest. She had nothing special to show, no elaborate arrangement, no impressive technique. There was only one thing that was hers alone, the memory of cold nights and the melodies her mother whispered, when the world felt distant. And that was the path she decided to follow. The theater was immense, with red velvet seats and spotlights that lit up like artificial stars. The first acts received polite applause, trained voices, perfect gestures, difficult songs performed with precision. Everything was beautiful, but everything felt predictable. When her name was called, the audience remained quiet, with no expectation. Some still remembered the silent girl, out of place among the others. She climbed the stage slowly, wearing a simple, handmade outfit, and holding only a crumpled paper with the lyrics of the chosen song. With no background music, no effects, nothing but her own breath, she began to sing. The song was old, popular, known by many, but born in a place very far from that theater. It wasn't a song that impressed with complexity, but one that spoke directly to the memory of those who had loved, lost, or dreamed in silence. The first rows stopped moving. Farther back, cell phones were lowered. Little by little, the sound of the audience's breathing became the only thing besides her voice. Time seemed suspended, as if no one dared interrupt the moment. It was the least technical song of the night, and the most heartfelt. When she finished, she didn't know what to expect. She stood there, eyes down, hands clenched around the paper. A second passed, then another. And then someone stood up, then another. A third. Applause began, not as an explosion, but like a wave of recognition spreading through the theater. Among the faces, she saw a familiar one. Her mother sitting in the fourth row, hands over her heart and teary eyes. There were no screams, no hysteria, only restrained gratitude and deep respect. The poor girl who had been pushed onto the stage as a joke was now the reason everyone would remember that night. Subscribe to the channel to watch the next story that will bring tears to your eyes. See you next time.